All right. Hello, this is Krista with the lifeinprogress.ca, and I am delighted to be speaking with Nicole Gulotta of Wild Words. We'll make sure you have the correct website after. Nicole and I are going to be talking about the idea of a seasonal approach to living and creating. Nicole is the author of Eat This Poem and her newest book, Wild Words, Rituals, Routines, and Rhythms for Braving the Writer's Path. And it's a book I devoured hungrily. And there's so many notes in here. Like if I could, I'll just try to flip and see if you can see a little bit. Like there's just like, I just have so many like notes on the margins and stuff. And I don't normally write that much in a book. Maybe you couldn't quite see how many, but in this one, it just felt right. So it's a book that I really enjoyed it. We can chat more about that after. Nicole is an INFJ, if you guys know Myers-Briggs stuff. She's a tea drinker, poetry lover, and feels most at home by the sea. And her work helps writers embrace the season they're in, create at their own pace, and care for their minds and bodies along the way. So as Nicole and I were chatting before we press record, well, actually, no, I was telling her how I feel like we speak the same language, but then there are other similarities as well. And just one of them simply is that she approaches life and creating with a seasonal perspective. And we'll kind of go into what we mean by that. So welcome, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I shared briefly, Nicole, you may not know this, but I talk about this all over the place, but I have panic attacks right now, of panic disorder and PTSD. And one of the new things that I'm doing right now is yoga nidra. And I learned about it from you. I mean, I've heard about it, but you have a 7-day email series on yoga nidra, and you've talked about it. And I think you probably have mentioned it in the book, and maybe that's sort of what kind of put that seed in my brain, so that when I knew I was ready to add in some new forms of sort of relaxation therapy or meditation, something like that sprinkled throughout my day to help with the panic disorder, that seed was there. So anyways, I started it this week only. So
good.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about that, because it seems to me that that's one of the ways that you tend to your own mind-body health as you're writing. And I don't think that's a connection people would make often. So anyways, I'm totally off track already.
No, that's fine. No, it's good to get the talking points up at the top.
Well, I'll save that. I'll go into my questions, and then I would love for that to come up at some point.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's really part of like a body first approach that I have to my creativity, and we can talk more about that.
Okay. Yeah. I don't want to miss it. Okay. So you shared, I found out on your website that you're an INFJ. I'm an ISFJ. What else can you tell me about your wiring or personality that you feel comfortable sharing? And then how have these aspects of your wiring served you in living imperfectly on purpose in every season? And I'm always trying to help my community build these connections, like figure out like who we are as humans, shame-free, and then really understanding how that impacts how we show up to the world and to our work and problem solve and even learn to love ourselves better and more deeply through the seasons of life.
Yeah. I think it's so empowering to know how we're wired. I love those kinds of personality tests, and Enneagram I've just been getting into in this past year as well. And so for me as an introvert, introverts, I like to think of it how we have this like rechargeable battery system where I love spending time with people. I love doing things like this. I love connecting in person. I love, meeting people for dinner in a crowded restaurant, but all of that stuff depletes my energy. And so I need to make sure that I have ways and mechanisms to make sure I refill that power source, essentially.
Yeah.
So I needed some really supportive boundaries in order to do that. And this is something I think I've known this about myself for a really long time, that this is how I sort of function. But I would say, I think when my first book came out, so that would be, I guess, 2017, so a handful of years ago, I sort of had an experience, kind of to your point about like doing this imperfectly and making adjustments. I had a chance to sort of test this in action a little bit more and figure out kind of what works for me and what's ideal and what's not. So there are so many circumstances, I think, that we can't always control, especially if we're participating in something. We might not control, when something's happening or the time of day or, whatever it may be. And I remember there was one particular month, I think it was like 2 or 3 months after the book came out, where they weren't back to back, but I had 3 events in 1 month, but travel. So I was getting on a plane, I was going somewhere for a handful of days and then coming back. And as energizing and as fun as that was at the time, I also remember ending the month kind of feeling like, okay, that might have been too much. And at the time too, my son was like under 2. So I had kind of all of that kind of mom stuff on top of it as well. So, so that was just kind of an example of an opportunity where I got to try some things and feel like, okay, like I really loved doing this, but I need to be really mindful about my schedule. And so I never book things back to back. Like if I have podcast interviews or things like this, I will not schedule them, one after the other. It'll be like 1 a week, max, if that. And that's in part too, not only just to bookend the experience. And so I can kind of refill that well, but also kind of getting back to the Enneagram. So I'm an Enneagram 5, and that type is the most boundaried of the types. So that's like sort of a superpower of mine, is like putting up boundaries, which can be great. But the other thing is basically the core fear of a 5 is to be, seen as sort of incompetent in something. And so one of the things too, as an introvert and a type 5, I like to make sure that I have enough time in between things so that I can prepare fully and feel like I'm showing up as kind of the most competent, capable version of myself. So with that too, I'm a really deep thinker. And I spend a lot of time in my head, and that's one of the ways that I problem solve and just sort of work through different things creatively. So usually before I start something, whether it's like a book or a program or anything, I've thought about it a ton. And it's almost like I kind of plant that seed in my brain, and then I just let my subconscious go to work. And I know that as I just move about my day and I spend a little time thinking here and there and maybe jotting down some notes as they come, that my brain is doing all of that work it needs to do to prepare myself to actually take action when the time is right. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me think of something that I've only more recently learned about how I work. And it's hard because I have been in a particularly hard season.
Yeah.
And so it means your brain isn't operating optimally anyways, but I'm going to guess that this is still true, even in my, sort of easier seasons of life. But it's just that I am quite a procrastinator. And I always knew that there was it was always very fear-based, but even doing work that I really love and that what I've noticed is what I often would judge as procrastinating was actually I was putting down my roots. I was building my scaffolding because I need that to be able to do anything. And so I was like, doing a course online, and I was listening to podcasts, but all the while I'm making connections and I'm layering information upon like, oh, that theory over there and this experience. And I was building all of that. So then I could sit down, and I had already sort of made sense of some of this for myself. And I realized, oh my gosh, so I can stop fearing that process. That's part of how I work. And that really changed, but that's like this past, I don't know, last 6 to 12 months anyways. So isn't that cool?
I love that. I always say that thinking is underrated in our creative lives, because we often, when we think about the things that we're putting out in the world, we sort of, or like you're talking about a book, it's like you think about the finished book, like the thing that you're going to hold in your hands. But in order to even get there, you have to do so much inner work. And I think, and this might come up in a later question too, but there's something about trusting your own creative process and knowing what it is makes it so much easier to function, because then you're not worried about, why am I not doing this? Or I think I should be doing that. It's like, no, you can see the patterns and the trends and sort of how you have functioned over the years in different situations, and come to rely on those things in your creative life.
Exactly. And this is something sort of broadening the conversation out. I would say that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about seasonal living, is how much less fear we live with. And because of that knowledge that we've, that information we've gathered and then kind of tested applying it in various ways. It's just a gentler and a more compassionate way of being in the world, I think, overall. So
I agree.
I say here that I think we might be kindred spirits. And I may, I'll scare you off because this is our first time meeting. I feel like I'm being hyper, and I'm like, she's going to walk away super drained.
No, but I've read your work. Like, I know it's not like the first time I've heard of you. Like, I'm on your email list. Like, I know the work that you do. I know where your heart is. So yeah, I totally understand.
Okay, I found you somehow, but through your passion and commitment to seasonal living. And more, I feel like your work reflects what I consider this gentler and more compassionate way of being and working with the seasons instead of fighting against them. So that's how I kind of built the connection. And as I said, I'm using one of your 7-day, I think you have a few different offerings on your website. And I love everything that you have on there. I'm like, ooh, I would do that. I like that. So, okay. But would you please share how you came to this practice? Like, I guess just a sort of journey here into working in this way.
Yeah, well, it's not something that was really my default. It's something I learned to embrace over time. And writing into and just sort of living in tune with the seasons ultimately came through my experience of motherhood and just being sheer force, to slow down and just rethink everything about how I was functioning in the world, particularly when it came to my creativity. And so in the years leading up to that, I was just, I was working. I was always working full time. I had a day job. And then there was always something else on the side. So whether it was like writing my first book, or I had been blogging, I started blogging in 2008 and did that for a really long time, especially in the food blog space. I once ran a food activism website for other food bloggers. So there was always a lot going on. And because I am really efficient and hyper organized and like semi type A, I could do all that stuff pretty easily. And I hadn't become a mother yet. So I didn't have that other constraint on my time and energy quite yet. But then when my son was born, and I think I share this story in the introduction of Wild Words, I just had one of those moments kind of in the 4th trimester. So he was maybe like a handful of weeks old, where like my husband was at work and my son was sleeping in his little rocker. And I just kind of like stood in the living room for a minute and just looked around and thought, okay, everything is different. how am I going to move forward? And I knew that I wanted to write another book. And I had just come off of writing my first book. And that was kind of with my publisher and in the final stages. And I kind of had this fear because I had written that book under completely different circumstances. And my life now looked entirely different. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't sure how to do it. I would need to figure out how to do it all over again. And I was learning in that time, the aha moment really came for me when I was just watching how quickly my son was changing. And, you know, with babies, they don't stay in the same place for very long. Like they're hitting milestones all the time and things are shifting. And as soon as you get comfortable with one thing, you know, something changes. Yeah. And so the big lesson, especially early on, I think it's true anytime in parenting, but especially in those early days for survival, it was really about being able to adapt and how well I could do that. And once I sort of became comfortable with that idea, I thought, okay, well, what if I took some of those lessons from early parenthood and what if I applied it to my creative life? And if I had this sense of being able to adapt quickly and make changes and be comfortable with some discomfort here and there, what would happen? And I think I'd been circling around this idea of seasonal living for a long time. But that was kind of the moment that it all sort of made sense and I could experience it really deeply. And so I kind of went through this process where I started thinking about different experiences I'd had in my writing life and realizing that I could actually name them and sort of contain them in different seasons. You know, there's periods of liminal space, or when you're dealing with self-doubt, or you're at the very beginning of a project or the very end, and all of these seasons in between. And I felt that it was very empowering to be able to name a season and say, this is where I am right now, knowing that seasons change and they shift.
Right.
So that was really, yeah.
So did it diminish your fear then? Because you could.
Oh, yeah. And I think what it does too, in addition to working with the fear in a different way, or self-doubt, or the inner critic, whatever you want to call it. But I think also recognizing those seasons in your creative life, for me, I found, and a lot of writers that I talk to, that it really helps with just focusing on where you are and not comparing yourself to this other person over here who's doing this thing that you think you want to do and you feel like they're so far ahead of you.
Right.
So that was, I think, a real benefit. And once I sort of hit on that methodology, or I guess whatever you want to call it, that system, it aligned so much with what I was feeling, how I wanted to move forward in my life, how I wanted to slow down, be more mindful. So yeah, that's kind of the origin story of seasonal living for me.
Yeah. So it's newer for you then, it sounds like.
Newer. It probably in the last, my son's 5. So in the last 5 years or so. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for sharing that. I also have a question for you. Did you say, I think I heard you on a podcast and you said it took, was it from seed, like conception kind of, to getting this baby in the world that took 5 years, or was that?
That was my first book. Yeah. It was 5 years. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this was like probably the standard couple-ish or something?
Yes. Yeah. This was a little faster. My first book, I did not write under contract, and I had a very long drawn out process with the publisher for that one. So start to finish, it was 5 years. And then Wild Words was kind of the standard 2 years, where I had like a year to write it and then a year of all the back end stuff before publication. Yeah.
I found that really encouraging. That is not in our notes. But I do want to let you know, Nicole, that everything I've read from you, just for, I am your ideal reader. Yeah. I just must be that.
I think you are.
Yeah. I just love it. And I get it, and I feel affirmed by it and encouraged. But, even just talking about, and also I do particularly enjoy truth tellers, mm-hmm. which doesn't mean you have to reveal all your personal business, but when there's a vulnerability, and mm-hmm. I felt that even in your book, a vulnerability, and I could feel even the struggle sometimes, mm-hmm. I don't want to go there, but like, you know, that sort of that, and it just felt real. It just felt real. And so anyway, on this podcast, maybe Ali Fallon's podcast.
Oh yeah.
And you shared about the 5 years. And I just thought that was so encouraging. Like, and even when I listened, I already had a book deal, I think, but I don't care. I just think it's so easy in life, whether we're talking about writing or whatever we're dreaming about, to just feel discouraged, you know, like obstacles come up and we all have limitations in our lives. And we're all going to have to make a choice, I guess, right? About to just say yes to that little soul calling or whatever it is, even if it is writing in the margins, which is one of those things that you chat about.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is a story I like to tell, simply because I want it to be an encouraging message to people, and that, you know, our work, it really does take time, and kind of going back to that seasonal philosophy too, when we are so focused on what other people are doing. And I remember during that time when I was writing, I hadn't fully embraced a seasonal mindset yet. So I was watching as all my other food blog friends were getting cookbook deals and publishing their books. And I'd been writing my blog longer, and I felt like, you know, I had this idea and it needed to be in the world. And that was, I had moments that it was very hard. And these were friends of mine. Like, I was so happy for them and I was so excited to read their books. But I just felt like, when is it going to be my turn? Like, that was kind of in my head all the time. But I also just had to trust the process and give myself permission to write, even though I didn't have that outside affirmation yet of the book deal, and just know that this is my time to do it. This idea is with me now. I have time to do it. And if I wait, I might not. And so everything finally kind of lined up, and I was able to move ahead once I gave that permission slip to myself.
Again, spinning off, but it still reminds me of like a practical application to just everyday life. To me, it feels like the choice between sort of like noticing how much frustration we can carry around because things aren't perfect. Like that person was late or that. And then when you witness what's going on, like when you pause there for a moment and you just witness what you're doing, you're like, oh, I'm letting go of these beautiful things because I'm so distracted by, you know, these few things. And I feel like that requires conscious daily practice to really be in our lives and to look.
I agree.
Yeah, but it's really good. It's really true to see, that it can be hard, and also there can be all this, like these little pockets or spark, you know, of beauty and possibility, but we have to pause to kind of look around and notice them.
Yeah, for sure.
So Nicole, you got your MFA in poetry from Vermont College of Fine Art, and I want to talk about that in terms of writing. And again, I always want people to think a little bit beyond writing in case you're not a writer. You know, you might think of it in terms of going back to school, starting your own business, doing whatever it is that you feel like doing in this season of life. So a lot of the people that I work with struggle with comparison and feeling not good enough. And I will say a lot of these women have multiple degrees and they're well accomplished and they've done cool things in the world, but we still struggle with self-doubt, right? And that's, I think, to normalize that is helpful.
I don't think it goes away entirely. I think it's a matter of learning to work with it, and there's some good stuff disguised in there too.
Okay, I'll finish my sentence and then I want to see what you have to say about it. Yeah, so, and some of the things I've heard is like, you're not a real painter. I'm not a real because that person went to school, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but it's in you. And it's like, it's a thing you want to do. And so I'm curious if your degree really does boost your confidence in your work. And I say that actually just valuing education in general. So I don't think sometimes people go do study things because it makes them happy, even if it doesn't lead to a direct job and all of that. So does that boost your confidence in your work? And, or do you wrestle with keeping your eyes on your own path? We've touched on that a little bit. And then there's another question, but I feel like I'm being too wordy. But you can respond to that one first and then we'll come back.
Yeah. I think in terms of the confidence, I think at the beginning, it did help with a confidence boost. And that was in part because I was really young. I went straight to my MFA program from undergrad. So I was like 22. And I didn't have any other writing experience. I had had a couple of poems published in a few magazines, but I didn't have any professional experience to speak of, which I think that would have given me some of that confidence anyway. And I wasn't really doing it for a professional reason because I knew that I didn't want to teach in academia either. So I think at the time it really was a kind of a combination of, wanting to feel like I was a real writer, and that was one way to do it, and to sort of just prove to people around me that I was very serious about this. But I don't think it eliminated comparison at all. I think it helped early on, and I think too, when I look back, I don't think I needed to have the degree in order to publish Eat This Poem, but I think because that was my first book and I was kind of an unknown, like very niche blogger, I think it helped a little bit give some credibility to me being able to speak about poetry in the way that I was. But when I first went to school for grad school, I didn't have my literary food blog at that time. So that was something that had kind of evolved. But I do think it helped a bit. But that's kind of why I go back to the seasonal approach too. And sort of like we've talked about, that the comparison, when we have that seasonal approach and we're recognizing where we are and kind of the lane that we're in, instead of comparing ourselves to other people, I do think that helps a lot. And I also think, and this is kind of a much broader statement, but I think as women, we are just conditioned to not feel worthy of ourselves, our ideas. I think the practice of feeling worthy and feeling confident is something I know that I work on a regular basis. Yoga Nidra is something that helps me with that. But sort of connecting to that inner knowing that we have, that for so many of us we were never taught to cultivate, and has sort of been suppressed for so long. So that, again, that's like that's like a whole other conversation. But I do think there's something there, especially for women, with that.
Yeah, that would be a good conversation.
Yeah.
Another time. Yes. So I think, so no matter what, I mean, we probably, because we're human, it's probably hard not to tip into comparison on occasion.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I feel like a seasonal approach to life reminds me, it's not that I don't start, especially if I'm feeling weary, that's where I really notice some of these old things popping up again, like envy or comparison, or, but it quickly reminds me of truth, to see that, we're not even on the same path. Like you can't even compare that. Like it doesn't even make sense, and it helps me. It also, I think, gives me an excitement about life, this sense that we get to keep doing this. Like some of it's really hard, but we come, it's not linear either, right? So we get to loop around and kind of go through these seasons and practice and all of that. And that excites me.
Yeah, I like that too. The fact that the seasons are going to change and we know that to be true. I think that one of the complications with, creative seasons, unlike nature seasons, we don't have a date usually on the calendar. We're like, oh, today is the first day of spring. So we might be in something and we might not know exactly when it's going to end. But I do think that nature, gives us that model and kind of that metaphor to look at too, which is very comforting.
So I'm going to go backwards here. And one of the questions I had planned for us was, how have you deepened your roots of self-awareness and self-compassion through the practice of writing with the seasons?
I think that a seasonal mindset, by its very nature, is compassionate to ourselves. And it just, like we've talked about, it reinforces where we are and what we need to be doing right now, and helps us live more mindfully and just stay in the present moment as well. And I think for me, over the years, cultivating that mindset is what has allowed me to trust myself more deeply and my own creative process. And we talked about that, I think, a little bit at the beginning, that I think it's a huge benefit for us to understand how our creativity works, because mine is not going to work the same way as yours or someone else's. You know, there might be some things that might be similar, maybe have some overlap, but I think we each have a unique imprint based on a lot of different factors, as well as just what our current circumstances allow for as well. So really tuning into that and working with that knowledge and making decisions, you know, knowing all of that about myself and how I work, and just looking at, okay, what does my life look like today? Not what I want it to be in the future. I think that has really made the biggest difference for me.
So again, this isn't in the notes, but in my work, I do a lot of like worksheets where I like use practical tools, like to help people track or help people kind of build those patterns. And so what are a few ways that you use a ritual, routine, or rhythm or something to, you know, to do this work?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing I do kind of in a seasonal framework too, I typically sit down at the end of each season, like spring, summer, fall, winter. So every few months, I sit down and I do a bit of a ritual where I look back at what I had accomplished in the season that I just finished, what I'm looking at doing in the upcoming season. And I kind of drill down from like annual, seasonal, monthly, and weekly. And that might sound like a lot, but I do it in a way that doesn't feel very rigid. So I do really like kind of an annual planning process where I just can reflect on the year and think about the future and kind of dreams, and then kind of work my way back. And inevitably things change. And I remember at the beginning of this year, especially because we were coming out of 2020, I sat down to do my typical kind of annual review process. And I could not think past like March, you know? So I had some ideas and things that I was like, oh, well, maybe I could do this year. Maybe this would feel right. But just given the year we were coming out of, I couldn't quite go there. So that was fine. I had some ideas, you know, and I'll revisit them. And I'm just kind of letting things flow. And then I do the seasonal check-in. And then I also do it on this, again, kind of another conversation. I do it on kind of a cyclical level too, like with my menstrual cycle. I do a lot of project management through that as well. So I check in on a monthly basis and sort of pick things to do based on where I'm at in my cycle, where my energy levels are, all that sort of thing. And then on Sunday nights, I have a ritual where I have a weekly planner that I usually like make a cup of tea, and I sit down and just kind of look at my calendar and see if there's anything that I have that's like on the calendar for the week, and I put in there. And then I just kind of transfer my to-do list, you know, to the next page, and pick maybe.
Oh, sounds so similar. Like I do all of this too, but I know, you know, there's people listening who are like what? Like you do all of that? Like they can do what? Like, you know, maybe a Monday morning, what are my top 3 priorities for the week, you know? And I know there have to be some good ways like that people could do it, like other than like all this type of paper tracking, which we love apparently.
I like it. And I don't know, I've really relaxed, like in terms of how many things that I can even get done in a week too. Cause I still have a day job too. So when you take that into account, my son's not in school right now, you know, I can maybe do one thing that's kind of on my creative to-do list. So I'm very, very kind to myself. Some weeks I'm able to get more done, and I really go with the flow quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So far, your more creative work, you don't have it doesn't have pressure on it to pay the bills, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So we don't even have to go there, but it's probably helps to have that freedom so that you can panic less, right? So So
my day job involves writing, but it's not my personal work that's contributing. So I think that can definitely change the game a little bit, and sort of how you relate to your creativity as well.
Yeah. And some of the I think that would be, and I'm just realizing that now that would be a fun like 3-way conversation, or have a few different voices of people working with slightly different, and kind of hear from each other. And this is, let's just veer off a little bit here. I don't have a fully formed thought though right now, but I feel like that could be helpful, except my mind is so bad right now at losing thoughts. I see a lot of people that I'm supporting as they start or grow their small businesses. Some are artists, and I work with businesses of different sizes and stuff, but it's a common thing. Like that fear about it has to pay the bills is a big one that I don't think people like to hear this. I think no matter our creative pursuit, it's like people might think there's a whole lot of money in writing your first 1 or 2 books. And it's like, you're not.
There is not.
Like, I could make a whole lot more money if I just stick with the other stuff I'm already doing. Like this is
some people do get a big advance, but the majority of writers do not.
So I think, it's like somewhere I think we do ourselves a kindness also. Maybe this is, probably a whole other episode, but whatever. I'm already halfway in the thought, but I think we can do ourselves a kindness by thinking about, are there ways I can ease the pressure on my creative stuff and make space for it? Like, it doesn't always have to make money at all. And for those of us who also do want to have like small businesses and that, maybe we can set our bar a little bit lower for what enough means, or maybe we do go get another job that can pay the bills, so that we can do it a lot of ways. And it reminds me of the flexibility and creative problem solving that's required in this kind of seasonal approach, right? Where we don't wait for perfect. We don't wait for, we actively look for the little places where we can, get things done. And
I remember there was a brief period of about 6 months when I had the company I was working for. Their headquarters were in another state, and they ended up closing the office that I was working out of. And so I had this period where I was unemployed for a little bit and kind of looking for the next thing. And I thought, this is an amazing time to start my business. I had gone through Marie Forleo's B School, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I created my first course, which sort of provided the framework of Wild Words, the book, ultimately. But I created it under a lot of duress because I was putting so much pressure on this one offering to potentially substitute the income that I was making from my previous job. And it was sort of like this test ground to see, could I do this? Could I actually not have to go back to work in the same capacity? And of course, it did not make enough money to cover. It was like maybe 1 month or something. It was not something I could do sustainably at that point. And I just remember that kind of being a wake-up call for myself, that it doesn't mean that I'm never going to get to that point where I have a sustainable creative business on my own terms. But there's something about not creating things under those really stressful circumstances too, that allows it to breathe and allows you to give yourself that space as well. It can't always happen like that, but I think, and for me, just the personality that I am, knowing how much time I need to think about stuff, I can't put that kind of pressure on myself. So I think I might have said this on Ali Fallon's podcast too, and also in Wild Words, the idea of your day job as a patron, essentially.
Right.
It is really supporting you to be able to do creative work without having to put the pressure on it. So you can make mistakes. You can launch something that maybe isn't as successful as you wanted it to be. And you can experiment and try new things and just take it slow and not feel that burden and feel like your creativity is being stifled because of it too.
Yeah.
I've always had a complicated relationship with my work life and my creative life. But I remember when I first started thinking about my day job in that way, that it was very freeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And my situation's quite a bit different right now, but yeah, I think it's all just good conversations. I think it's fun to just think about all the possibility. Like I feel like the world is full of joyful possibility, and it requires us to do hard things like surrender to reality,
Right.
tell the truth. Like,
Yeah.
and the more we can do that, I think we can find these real pockets of real joy and, wonderful ways of infusing our ordinary lives with the things that really light us up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can
I
be
always say too, like writing and create whatever kind of creative work you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it is just an exercise in making choices all the time. You're constantly having to make choices about what to prioritize, where to put your energy, what's most important, how to, experimenting with changing something over here or there. We're always making choices. And I think if we have the right mindset too, it just makes it so much easier to be able to adapt. And so even if you are writing a book under contract, which I did with Wild Words, and I think you're doing now as well. And sometimes that can feel energetically kind of stressful. But there's also movement that can happen, when you set your mind to just prioritizing that and letting some other things go in service of that work that's happening right now too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I am in life, like so much pruning. And I would say really a lot of it is being forced upon me. I know that it's still my choice. So I am saying yes to it actually, but it wasn't, I didn't envision to feel this way or be here. And yet it's good. It's like both. It's just, because it's forcing a clarity and an honesty that I live with right now that 5 years ago I could only wish for, and back then I didn't have the courage. And so, just, I can feel that, a lot of pruning to make space for some things that, can be easily, like, you can feel scared from doing the thing that your soul really wants, or however you want to frame that as an individual,
Yeah.
And I think, Deb's here and the women in my Brave and Beautiful community, I think for the most part, they're there, and certainly they stay if they're ready to do some of that harder work. Which is cool.
Yeah.
Because I get to be a part of it. So, well, I have, I think I'm going to have to miss something here. So, maybe can you give us some encouragement or practical wisdom for the people who are longing to say yes to that thing that really they want? They've been afraid, and they're worried that if they don't do it now, like they're already 45 or 50 or 60 or whatever, they're kind of at maybe what feels like a crossroads, and saying yes to that thing, that creative thing, or whatever that thing is. Just some words of encouragement that you would give for them to end out our call? And I'm thinking, you've been there. You've been in some moments where you're like, you're so pulled together, but I know that you're human, so that you probably have ugly cried. And
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think, and the advice that I often give to myself all the time too, is to trust that feeling. Like if you have I think our stories are with us for a reason. I think life will continue to whisper, and sometimes it gets louder and louder until we hear it. And if you are a creative and you're really in tune with that, I know I feel that way as a writer, that the right thing appears at the right time. And it's our job to listen to it and to take mindful action when appropriate. And so I think, the first thing I would say is to just trust. If you have that instinct and that seed of an idea and something that you are like a little bit afraid of, but also excited by, and the thing that keeps you up at night, the thing you can't stop thinking about, that's yours and it's with you for a reason. And so I always just encourage people to follow that and to trust that. And then on like a really practical level, because the first part was a little more kind of like spiritual, emotional, all of that. But on a really practical level, I would say, and you mentioned it at the beginning, the idea of writing in the margins or doing whatever it is you do in the margins and really exploring and embracing them. Because the truth of the matter is most of us, no matter what circumstance we're in, do not have an ideal situation for doing the thing that we want to do. I would love to spend all day working on my writing projects. I can't do that. That's not what my life looks like right now. So the choice is either to just kind of stay in that frustration and to blame my circumstances for my inability to write or to do whatever it is that I want to do, or I can embrace margins in as little as 5 or 10 minutes a day. I wrote Wild Words in 15-minute increments on my lunch break, taking walks around my building in a few spare minutes at night before my son went to bed. Like that is how it gets done. And one of the ways that you can really embrace margins, I think, is by looking at your circumstances, not your ideal situation, but like what is actually happening. And one area to look at is social media use. I have found that when I spend time away from social media, it doesn't mean I'm giving it up entirely and I'm never coming back. But when I make conscious choices to say, for this month, I'm not going to have Instagram on my phone, or for that month, I'm going to, stop looking at Facebook or whatever it is. I can get so much done because what I've done is I've triggered my brain to open up headspace for that thing that I really need to do. So even though nothing about my circumstances has changed, and I'm actually doing that in the month of February right now, nothing about my circumstances has changed. But because I don't have Instagram on my phone and I'm not checking it constantly, my brain is not stuck in that endless scroll. And I actually have space to think about something that's really important to me that I want to work on right now. And again, it's about, we have to make that choice. Like maybe I wanted to stay on Instagram because I think it's fun and I like to connect with people. But if I don't make choices like that for my creativity's sake, it's not going to have the momentum that I need to see it through, really. So I would say trust and then practically actually make some small shifts to go in the direction of what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Where would you love people to come check out your work?
Yes. Well, my books are available anywhere books are sold. And then you can connect with me. There's Wild Words. You can connect with me online. The best place is to go to thewildwords.com. And there you can sign up for my weekly writing newsletter. And there are lots of other resources like e-courses and things like that to support your creativity.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for your time today.
Oh, of course. I really, really had fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.